A king stands before the most powerful woman in Greece, his empire's fate resting on her next words. This was the world of the ancient Greek oracles, the nerve centers of the ancient world, where everyone from mighty rulers to common farmers sought divine guidance. But the true stories behind these legendary institutions are far more shocking than the myths suggest. By the end of this, you will know 30 incredible, untold stories that reveal the real power, the hidden intrigue, and the often brutal reality of these prophetic sites. We will uncover the oracle who saved a city from its own army, the child who guided seekers through terrifying rituals, and the moment a king's fatal misinterpretation cost him everything. What is the one force you believe truly shaped the destiny of the ancient world? Spartan ambassadors stood tense before the smoke-filled chamber, their question hanging in the air. Should they launch a full-scale war against their rising neighbor, Argos? The very air in Delphi seemed to crackle with the weight of their militaristic ambition. The Pythia, the voice of the god Apollo, did not give a simple yes or no. Instead, she offered a riddle wrapped in divine poetry. She declared that the strength of Argos would be taken, and the city would mourn the loss of its great hero. To the eager Spartan generals, this sounded like a guaranteed victory. It was a promise that Argos would fall, but one leader, a man named Chilon, saw the terrifying double meaning hidden within the prophecy. He argued that the god was not promising them victory in an attack, but rather foretelling that Argos would defeat itself. The strength taken was its own internal strife, and the hero mourned would be an Argive leader killed by his own people. Chilon persuaded the hot-headed Spartan assembly to wait, to be patient, and to focus on their own defenses. His interpretation proved stunningly correct. Argos was soon ripped apart by a brutal civil war, exactly as the oracle had mysteriously foretold. The city's power crumbled from within without a single Spartan spear being thrown. This was the profound power of the Pythia. She did not just predict the future, she offered a choice, a puzzle that demanded wisdom over blind aggression. In a society built on the ideal of relentless military offense, this divine message forced a moment of rare and life-saving caution, preventing Sparta from marching directly into a trap of its own making. While the Pythia guided the fate of empires from her majestic temple, another oracle offered power to the common person in a far more primal and personal way. Deep in a remote grove at Dodona, the oldest of all Greek oracles, the divine voice did not come from a priestess but from the rustling leaves of a sacred oak tree. For centuries, people traveled there not for grand political prophecies, but to inscribe their most private angers and desperate pleas onto thin sheets of lead. These were not questions for the god Zeus, but direct commands, desperate petitions for divine justice and sometimes for brutal revenge. Modern archaeologists digging at the site unearthed these folded lead tablets, a hidden archive of ancient human emotion. A person would carefully scratch their request into the soft metal, then fold the tablet tightly, often piercing it with a nail, as if to seal the curse and make it impossible to reverse. They believed the sacred oak tree, a direct conduit to Zeus, would hear their whispered rage and enact their will. The curses they left behind are stunningly intimate. One tablet from a jilted lover begs the gods to make his former beloved incapable of pleasure with her new partner. Another, from a businessman cheated in a deal, calls upon Zeus to utterly destroy the fortunes and health of his rival until the man is ruined. These were not idle wishes, they were formal, ritualized acts of spiritual warfare. The person would often perform a small ceremony, speaking the curse aloud before the sacred tree before hiding the folded lead tablet in a dedicated pit or spring, a place where the gods of the underworld could also receive it. This was the deeply personal and sometimes dark side of divine petition. It reveals a world where people felt they could actively weaponize divine power to settle a lover's quarrel, win a legal dispute, or crush a commercial competitor. The belief was absolute. The rustling leaves of the great oak were not just an answer, they were the sound of a god agreeing to take up your cause. Yet the most cautionary tale of all did not involve a subtle riddle, but a prophecy that seemed perfectly, dangerously clear. It belongs to Croesus, the famously wealthy king of Lydia, a man who believed he could buy certainty from the gods themselves. Before he risked his vast empire in a war against the rising power of Persia, he decided to test every major oracle in the known world. He devised a brilliantly simple experiment. On the same predetermined day, his messengers were to ask each oracle far from his palace what King Croesus was doing at that very moment. The answers he got back were mostly wrong, vague guesses, but from the Oracle at Delphi, the response was breathtakingly precise. The Pythia declared that Croesus was cooking a tortoise and a lamb together in a bronze pot. This was impossibly exactly correct. The king, seeking an omen, had chosen that bizarre recipe himself. Convinced he had found the one true source of divine knowledge, Croesus then asked his real question. Should he march against the Persian Empire? The answer from Delphi was just as confident. If Croesus attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. To the king, this was the green light he desperately wanted. The prophecy could mean only one thing. His victory was assured. He gathered his immense armies and crossed the river into Persian territory, confident he was about to topple a rival power. The great empire that was destroyed, however, was his own. Croesus' forces were decisively defeated by the Persian king Cyrus. His capital was sacked, his legendary treasures plundered, and his kingdom erased from the map. He had not misinterpreted a subtle clue. He had fallen into a trap of his own arrogance, hearing only what he wished to hear. The oracle had spoken the absolute truth, yet its meaning was entirely shaped by the listener's desire. This story became the ultimate ancient warning about the peril of prophetic ambiguity, a lesson that the most dangerous lies are often the ones we tell ourselves when presented with an inconvenient truth. Far from the grand columns of Delphi, on the windswept coast of Acarnania, a small local oracle at Thyrreion once spoke with a power that terrified its entire community. The story goes that the priestess there fell into a trance unlike any before, her voice trembling not with the god's wisdom but with a raw, desperate warning. She foretold a great sickness, a plague that would sweep through the region, leaving silence in its wake. The prophecy was not just a prediction of doom, it was a detailed survival guide. The oracle instructed the people to immediately isolate their town, to block the mountain passes and turn away all travelers. It commanded them to burn specific aromatic herbs in the public squares and to draw water only from a single, sacred spring high in the hills, a source they were to protect at all costs. Locals claimed that in the days following the prophecy, strange signs appeared. Birds were said to have fled the area en masse, and the waters of the nearby river turned a murky, unsettling color. The people of Thyrreion, gripped by a collective fear, obeyed the oracle's commands to the letter. They became a fortress against the unseen enemy, cutting themselves off from the world. Historians examining this local legend find a fascinating puzzle. Records from the broader region do indeed note several severe outbreaks of disease during the classical period, events that could easily have been remembered and woven into the oracle's story. The prescribed actions, the isolation, and the use of specific springs align remarkably well with practical ancient understandings of contagion, even if they were framed as divine instruction. This was not a prophecy about shaping an empire, but about saving a single community from annihilation. It shows how these local oracles served as the public health centers of their day, blending spiritual authority with what we might now recognize as early epidemiology. The story of Thyrreion begs a haunting question. Did the god truly speak, or was the priestess herself a brilliant observer, reading the subtle signs of a coming pandemic in the trade routes and the behavior of animals, and delivering that vital warning through the only channel her people would unquestioningly obey? The rustling oak at Dodona and the prophetic smoke at Delphi, I always held a promise of answers, but what happened when the voice of a god simply vanished? In the small town of Thyrreion, a local oracle dedicated to Apollo one day fell completely silent. This was not a temporary pause, but a permanent end to prophecy that coincided with one of the most unexpected military victories in Greek history. The legend begins with the Battle of Thyrreion, a clash between the mighty Spartan army and a much smaller force from the rising city of Thebes, led by their brilliant general Pelopidas. The Spartans, confident in their overwhelming numbers, expected an easy victory. Yet through sheer tactical genius and the fierce morale of his elite sacred band, Pelopidas shattered the Spartan line. It was a battle that stunned the Greek world and signaled the end of Spartan invincibility. And it was at this precise moment, the stories say, that the oracle at Thyrreion ceased to speak. The local belief was that the god Apollo had not merely given a prediction, he had physically departed his shrine to fight alongside the Theban heroes on the battlefield. His divine presence was so complete, so entirely committed to their cause, that he had no more words to give through his priestess. He had become the instrument of the future he might have once only foretold. The silence of the shrine was therefore not a curse, but a testament to his direct intervention. For the community that maintained the oracle, this presented a profound crisis. Was the silence a glorious sacrifice, their local god contributing to a greater national triumph? Or was it the ultimate abandonment, a divine eviction notice leaving them spiritually homeless? We can also read this event through a more practical lens. As Thebes grew in power following the victory, its political and religious focus shifted to grander state-sponsored sanctuaries. A small local oracle may have lost its funding, its patronage, and its relevance in the new political order. The priests may have simply closed up shop, and the story of the departing god was a powerful myth to explain a very mundane decline. The silence of Thyrreion forces us to ask what truly gives an oracle its voice. Is it genuine divine presence or the unwavering belief of a community? When the people stopped coming, when the offerings dried up and the political winds changed, did the god leave or did the faith simply fade away? But the image of a serene, passive priestess was not always the reality. One persistent legend speaks of a Pythia who broke every convention. During a moment of crisis, perhaps an invasion or a local war threatening Delphi itself, this woman did not merely prophesy from the safety of her temple. The stories claim she donned a helmet and armor, taking up a shield and spear to stand with the defenders, and it was from this battle line, with the clang of weapons around her, that she was said to have delivered a prophecy, her divine voice ringing out not from a smoke-filled chamber but from the front lines of combat. Whether this event was literal truth or powerful myth, its very existence is a rebellion. It presents a figure who was not just a channel for divine power, but an active, physical defender of her home, merging the roles of priestess and warrior in a way that completely upends our modern expectations. This human element, however, had a far darker side. The sacred trust between a seeker and the oracle was not unbreakable. In one of the most famous scandals of the ancient world, a prophetess was caught in an act of blatant paid deception. The story involves the wealthy and powerful Eleuidi family, rulers of the city of Thessaly. They desperately wanted a specific, favorable prophecy from the oracle at Delphi, one that would legitimize their political ambitions. So, according to the historian Herodotus, they resorted to a simple, worldly solution. They offered the Pythia a massive bribe. She accepted, and from her sacred tripod, she delivered the exact oracle the family had paid for, a divine endorsement crafted not by a god but by human greed. The scheme was eventually exposed, creating a crisis of faith that shook the reputation of Delphi to its core. The priestess involved was disgraced and removed from her position, her name erased from official records as a warning to others. These two stories, the warrior and the fraud, sit at opposite ends of the same spectrum. They force us to see these women not as interchangeable vessels, but as complex individuals with their own courage, weaknesses, and motives. The warrior Pythia, whether real or imagined, represents the ultimate embodiment of the oracle's power, a power so potent it could spill over into physical defiance. The bribed prophetess, by contrast, reveals the institution's greatest vulnerability, its reliance on fallible human beings who could be swayed by the very same political pressures and temptations that swirled around the sanctuary walls. Together, they dismantle the idea of a monolithic, infallible oracle. They show us an institution where divine authority was constantly being negotiated, tested, and sometimes, tragically, betrayed by the very people entrusted with its voice. The priestess who took up arms was a powerful symbol, but the oracle's reach extended far beyond a single act of defiance. It could command entire armies. This power was demonstrated with terrifying clarity in the First Sacred War, a conflict that reshaped the political landscape of Greece. The target was the city of Croesus, a prosperous community that controlled the vital coastal route leading to Delphi itself. The Croesusians, according to the allies arrayed against them, had committed two unforgivable sins. They imposed heavy taxes on pilgrims traveling to the sacred site, profiting from the faithful, and they were accused of outright sacrilege, perhaps even seizing land dedicated to the god Apollo. These were not just political grievances, they were framed as direct offenses against the divine. To respond, the Amphictyonic League, a powerful religious alliance of Greek city-states formed to protect the temple at Delphi, turned to the oracle for guidance and justification. The Pythia did not merely endorse their cause, she actively propelled it. She delivered prophecies that painted the war as a holy crusade, a necessary purification. The god Apollo, through his priestess, demanded the total annihilation of Croesus for its arrogance. This divine mandate transformed a regional dispute into a sacred duty. For 10 long years, the League's forces besieged Croesus, their resolve hardened by the oracle's unyielding pronouncements. When the city finally fell, the victors enacted the prophecy with brutal precision. Croesus was not just defeated, it was utterly erased from the earth. Its walls were torn down, its buildings burned to the ground, and its people were either killed or enslaved. Most strikingly, the fertile land of the Croesusian plain was formally cursed and dedicated to Apollo, forbidden from ever being farmed again. This was more than a military victory, it was a ritual act of destruction. The story of the First Sacred War reveals the Delphic oracle as a master of realpolitik, a spiritual authority that could summon and direct military force to eliminate a political and economic rival. Croesus' control of the pilgrim route was a direct threat to Delphi's own wealth and influence. By orchestrating its destruction, the oracle secured its economic future, ensured the safety of its visitors, and sent a chilling message to all of Greece. Crossing the god meant more than divine displeasure. It could mean the complete and sanctioned obliteration of your city. A conqueror's ambition can reshape the world, but only a god's affirmation can make it eternal. This truth drove Alexander the Great, master of the known world, to risk everything on a desperate pilgrimage into the emptiness of the Libyan desert. His goal was the legendary Oracle of Ammon at Siwa, a shrine so remote and ancient that it made Delphi seem almost commonplace. The journey itself became an epic trial. Alexander and a small band of his most trusted men left the safety of the Nile and plunged into the vast sea of sand, a place where the sun was a tyrant and the horizon offered no mercy. Ancient sources tell of how they were soon lost, their guides confused by featureless dunes under a blinding sky. Just as hope and water were running out, the story goes, 2 crows appeared, guiding the desperate party to the oasis sanctuary. Whether divine intervention or sheer luck, this perilous crossing cemented the legend before Alexander even asked his question. What could possibly drive the most powerful man on earth to endure such hardship? He did not need more territory or gold. He sought the one thing his armies could not conquer, a divine verdict on his own identity. Scholars have debated for centuries what he actually asked the priest of Ammon. Did he inquire if he would rule the entire world, or more intimately, did he seek confirmation of a burning personal belief that he was not merely the son of a mortal king, but the true son of the god Zeus Ammon himself? We will never know the exact words spoken in the inner sanctum, for Alexander fiercely guarded the oracle's response, but what happened next was unmistakable. He emerged a transformed man, radiating a new and unshakable confidence. From that day forward, Alexander openly referred to Zeus Ammon as his father and embraced his own divinity. This was not mere ego, it was a masterstroke of political and spiritual theater. By having his divine sonship confirmed by one of the most respected oracles, Alexander effectively placed himself above the petty squabbles of the Greek city-states he now ruled. He was no longer just a Macedonian king, he was a living god-king, a figure who commanded obedience not just through fear but through a celestial right. The journey to Siwa became the cornerstone of his legend, a story he carefully cultivated to elevate his rule into a cosmic destiny. It proves that even for a man who had everything, the whispered words of a priest in a distant desert temple held the ultimate power, the power to redefine a man as a god. While Alexander sought his destiny in a sun-scorched desert, another form of prophecy offered healing in the quiet of the night. Far from the public pronouncements at Delphi, a deeply personal and therapeutic form of divination was practiced at the sanctuary of Amphiaraus. Here, the god was not a distant cosmic power but a hero who had been swallowed by the earth during a legendary war, later venerated as a divine healer and dream sender. This was an incubation oracle, a place where the sick and troubled came not for a riddle but for a direct divine encounter in their sleep. The process was a sacred ritual. A seeker would first undergo purification, washing in sacred waters to cleanse both body and spirit. Then they would make a sacrifice, often a ram, to the hero god. The most crucial part of the ritual followed. The seeker would lie down to sleep within the sacred precinct, resting on the freshly flayed skin of the very ram they had just offered. This was not a comfortable night's rest, it was an act of intense spiritual vulnerability, the supplicant lying on a warm, sacred hide, their senses filled with the scent of sacrifice, their mind open and waiting for a visitation. The recorded cures are remarkably specific. One man, suffering from a persistent and bloody wound, dreamed that the god himself appeared, stitched his injury closed, and told him to pack the wound with a special ointment. Upon waking, he was healed. Another, plagued by chronic headaches, dreamed Amphiaraus touched his head and the pain vanished. These were not vague predictions of future health, but active, divine interventions experienced within the dream state itself. This practice reveals a side of Greek religion that was profoundly intimate. It was a form of spiritual medicine that addressed physical and mental anguish directly. The god did not speak in cryptic poetry from a tripod, he operated on you in your dreams. This contrast with the political machinations of Delphi could not be starker. At Amphiaraus, the focus was on the individual's suffering, on providing cures and comfort that the physical world could not offer. It asks us to reconsider the very purpose of prophecy. Was its highest function to guide empires or to heal a single, broken body in the dark of a sacred night? Desperation filled the Athenian assembly as the Persian war machine, the largest the world had ever seen, rolled toward their city. They had sent to Delphi for guidance, and the initial reply was pure horror. The Pythia foretold doom, describing a fire that would swallow Athens and urging them to flee to the ends of the earth. Stunned, the ambassadors begged for a second, kinder prophecy. This time, the oracle offered a riddle wrapped in a single, strange phrase. It declared that a wooden wall alone would not fall, and it spoke of a divine Salamis that would bring death to women's sons. The words wooden wall echoed through the city, sparking a fierce and frantic debate. The conservative elders argued it was a divine command to fortify the ancient Acropolis with its old wooden palisade to make a final, sacred stand. But one man, the visionary statesman Themistocles, saw a different future. He stood before the people and insisted the wooden wall was not a barrier of timber on a hill, but a fleet of wooden ships. He argued that the divine Salamis was not a tragedy for Athens, but a promise of victory if they confronted the Persian navy in the straits near that very island. His interpretation was a monumental gamble. It meant abandoning their homes and temples to the enemy, betting everything on a navy that was still new and untested. The assembly was torn between tradition and this radical new vision of defense. Themistocles, with brilliant persuasion, won the day. He convinced them that the oracle's reference to Salamis and the wooden wall was a coded message from the god himself, a strategic master plan disguised as a puzzle. The Athenians evacuated their entire city, and their fleet, that wooden wall, lured the massive Persian armada into the narrow waters near Salamis. There, the outnumbered Greek ships used their agility and local knowledge to achieve one of the most decisive naval victories in history, shattering the Persian invasion and saving Greek civilization. This was not a story of a god dictating an outcome. It was a partnership between divine ambiguity and human genius. The oracle provided the raw material, the cryptic clue, but it was Themistocles' intellect and courage that unlocked its true meaning, proving that the most powerful prophecies require a mind brilliant enough to understand them. Even the dead could demand to be heard. In the shadows of Greek drama, one of the most terrifying oracles was not spoken by a priestess but by a ghost. The playwright Aeschylus, in his masterpiece The Eumenides, presents a scene of chilling supernatural justice. The ghost of Clytemnestra, murdered by her own son Orsts as revenge for his father's death, rises from the underworld. She is not merely a spectre of regret, she is a being of pure, furious grievance. Her complaint is startlingly specific. She awakens the ancient, sleeping furies, the spirits of vengeance, not by recounting her murder, but by declaring that the offerings at her tomb have stopped. Orsts, acquitted of his crime by the gods of Olympus, is now free and has neglected the ritual duties owed to the mother he killed. This is the heart of her power. Her authority as an oracle of the dead stems from this neglect. The myth reveals a bedrock belief in the ancient world that the dead were not gone. They were a powerful, active force in the lives of the living, and their displeasure was a tangible, dangerous thing. To forget them was to invite chaos. This story blurs the line between theatrical fiction and actual religious practice. People really did believe they could consult the dead for prophecy at certain chthonic oracles, sites dedicated to the underworld gods. These were not places of lofty poetry, but of dark, primal communion. At a place like the Necromanteon, the oracle of the dead, seekers would undergo terrifying rituals to descend symbolically into the underworld. They would offer special sacrifices, often black animals, and spend nights in darkness, hoping to receive a vision or a message from a specific ancestor. The dead were thought to possess hidden knowledge, an understanding of past and future that the living could not access. The ghost of Clytemnestra is the ultimate embodiment of this belief. She is a chthonic oracle in dramatic form, a voice from below delivering a prophecy of ruin not through a riddle but through a direct supernatural complaint. Her power comes from a broken contract between the living and the dead. It makes you wonder how many real families, fearing the restless anger of a forgotten ancestor, made offerings at a tomb not out of love, but out of a desperate, superstitious need to keep the silent voices in the earth from ever waking. A simple Lydian shepherd, his hands calloused and his cloak smelling of earth and animals, once approached a small local oracle, desperate for an answer to a spreading sickness among his flock. The prophecy he received had nothing to do with sheep. The voice from the shrine declared that he, a man who slept in fields and owned nothing but his staff, was destined to wear a king's crown. He laughed aloud, a bitter sound in the sacred silence, believing the god was mocking his poverty. He returned to his hills, dismissing the words as a cruel joke. Yet destiny began to weave its tapestry from the most mundane threads. One day, while digging near a stream to create a better drinking spot for his sheep, his fingers brushed against a cold, hard object in the mud. It was a heavy gold signet ring, intricately carved with a royal emblem he did not recognize. He pocketed it, thinking only of its value for barter. Weeks later, delivering lambs to the capital, he got caught in a sudden, violent downpour and sought shelter in a grand courtyard. The owner emerged, and to his astonishment, it was the king's own daughter. She saw the ring which had fallen from his pouch and recognized it instantly. It belonged to her father, lost on a recent hunting trip. The ring's recovery was seen as a powerful omen, and the grateful king, impressed by the shepherd's apparent honesty, invited him to serve in the royal guard. This series of lucky breaks was just the beginning. A short time later, a sudden palace coup erupted. The king was assassinated, and in the ensuing chaos, with no clear heir, the royal council sought a compromise candidate, someone unconnected to the feuding noble families. They chose the shepherd, the man who had returned the royal ring and was seen as favored by the gods. The prophecy, once a source of ridicule, was fulfilled not through epic battle or noble birth, but through a lost ring, a chance storm, and a political vacuum. This story was told for generations, not in the halls of power, but in the humble homes of common people. It was a folk tale that carried a revolutionary idea. The oracles did not just speak to the highborn. They could whisper a future of unimaginable power to anyone, proving that destiny was a slippery, unpredictable force that could crown a king from the most unlikely of places. The fate of an entire city could be decided by a single word from the Pythia. Across the Mediterranean, the spread of Greek civilization was not a matter of chance, but a divinely directed enterprise. No colony was ever founded without first consulting the Oracle at Delphi. A city planning to send out its sons and daughters to a foreign shore would dispatch its most respected citizens to ask the god Apollo for his blessing, and most importantly, for the precise location of their new home. The Pythia did not give vague suggestions. She named specific landmarks: a river by a certain rock, a harbor near a white cliff, a plain between two hills. Her divine authority transformed a risky venture into a sacred mission, granting the colonists not just a map but a spiritual mandate. They were not merely settlers, they were fulfilling a god's command, a belief that forged unbreakable resolve in the face of wilderness, hunger, and hostile native populations. The foundation of Thyrreion in Libya stands as the ultimate testament to this process, a story of human desperation and divine insistence. The island of Thyrreion, suffering from a prolonged and severe drought, received a harsh prophecy from Delphi. The Pythia declared that the Thyrreians must send a colony to the distant coast of Libya. The command was met with disbelief and fear. Libya was a mysterious, faraway land, and the first group of men sent to scout the location returned with terrifying reports, describing it as a barren and impossible place for a settlement. They chose to ignore the oracle and settled instead on a small island closer to home. But the god's command would not be so easily dismissed. A 7-year drought then gripped Thyrreion, so catastrophic that the people were forced to draw lots, selecting one son from every family to obey the original prophecy and try again. They sent a second, more desperate delegation back to Delphi, essentially asking the priestess if she had gotten it right the first time. The Pythia's response this time was not a suggestion but a divine reprimand, a prophecy of stunning clarity and force. She compared Libya to a lush, milk and honey-drenched paradise, shaming them for their cowardice and ignorance. If they truly knew the beautiful, fertile land that was their destiny, she declared, they would not be hesitating. They would be sailing there in warships, not slow merchant vessels. This was no longer a puzzle to be interpreted. It was a direct order backed by a glorious promise. Armed with this renewed and forceful prophecy, the colonists finally set sail with unwavering purpose. They found the specific site the oracle had described, the plateau of Thyrreion, a place with a permanent spring and rich soil, and there they built their city. Thyrreion went on to become one of the wealthiest and most powerful Greek colonies, famous for its grain, its horses, and a rare, valuable medicinal plant called silphium. Its entire existence, its legitimacy, and its eventual prosperity were credited directly to the stubborn, insistent will of the Delphic oracle. The voice from the tripod did not just predict the future, it actively built it, planting the seeds of cities across the ancient world and commanding people to have the courage to make them grow. The voice that had guided kings and founded cities eventually grew faint. Centuries of Roman rule had transformed the sacred sanctuary into a monument, a tourist stop for emperors seeking to burnish their legacy with a bit of ancient mystique. Then came the final, haunting utterance, a prophecy that was less a prediction and more a death rattle. The legend says a Roman official, seeking a final sign, received a chilling message from the Pythia. She declared that the sanctuary was now without a lord and that the speaking water was silent. These were not words about the fate of an empire, but the fate of the god himself. Apollo was gone. The divine spring that once empowered the priestess to see the future had been reduced to mere water. This prophecy, if it ever truly happened, was a stark admission of its own obsolescence. The world had changed and the old gods were being ushered out. The political and spiritual landscape was shifting under the weight of a new, singular god. The rise of Christianity, with its absolute rejection of pagan deities, turned places like Delphi from centers of power into targets. The final blow came not from a decline in belief, but from a direct imperial command. In the late 4th century, the Christian emperor Theodosius I issued a series of edicts that formally outlawed pagan worship across the Roman Empire. The great temples were to be closed, their rituals forbidden. The sanctuary at Delphi, which had operated for over 1,000 years, was ordered shut. The eternal flame in the temple was extinguished, the sacred tripod was removed, the Pythia fell silent forever, not because the god withdrew, but because the emperor decreed it. This forces us to question the authenticity of that poignant last prophecy. Did a Pythia truly pronounce her own end, or was the story a beautiful, tragic fiction crafted later? Many scholars argue that the moving tale of the abandoned sanctuary was likely a literary creation by later pagan authors, a piece of nostalgic poetry written to mourn a world they had lost. It was a way to give the old gods a dignified exit, to have them declare their own departure rather than admit they were forcibly evicted by imperial soldiers and a new faith. The story of the last oracle is powerful because it symbolizes more than just the closing of a temple. It marks the silencing of a particular way of understanding the world, a way that was ambiguous, personal, and filled with many voices. The new world had one voice, one book, and one truth. The oracles did not just fade away, they were systematically dismantled, and their final, whispered prophecy was perhaps the most human sound they ever made, the sound of a profound and irreversible loss. Her voice was never meant to be understood directly. When the Pythia entered her sacred state, seated on the tripod high above the supposed chasm, the sounds she produced were raw and unstructured. Historians and linguists studying the few surviving prophecies suggest she spoke in a form of glossolalia, a frenzied outpouring of syllables that was not quite human language. This was not a coherent poem, but a torrent of divine noise. The true power and the true control lay with the male priests of the temple who stood beside her. These educated men were the translators, the interpreters who took her ecstatic utterances and shaped them into the polished, cryptic hexameter verse that was delivered to the trembling seeker. They were the gatekeepers of the god's message, transforming chaotic sound into structured, ambiguous poetry. This collaborative process reveals the inner workings of the oracle, not as a simple divine broadcast, but as a deeply human institution. The priests were masters of a specific poetic form, dactylic hexameter, the same meter used in the epic poems of Homer. This was not an accident. By framing the prophecies in this revered, traditional style, they instantly granted them an air of ancient authority and legitimacy. The structure itself was a tool of persuasion. More importantly, the priests were experts in crafting ambiguity. They perfected the use of conditional clauses and words with double meanings. A phrase like "you will destroy a great empire" could mean the empire of your enemy, or it could mean your own. The god was never wrong because the language was designed to be interpreted in multiple ways depending on the outcome. This system perfectly balanced divine mystery with human political savvy. The Pythia provided the raw, terrifying charisma of direct contact with the god, an unforgettable experience for the petitioner who witnessed her trance. The priests provided the intellectual framework that made the message usable and, more importantly, that protected the oracle's reputation for infallibility across centuries. The voice may have been a woman's, but the words that shaped history were very often a man's. So was the prophecy from Apollo, or from the collective mind of the temple priests, a brilliant fusion of spiritual ecstasy and calculated poetic craft. A king's most trusted advisor walked into the sacred grove at Dodona with a question designed to deceive both God and man. He was part of a conspiracy to overthrow the monarchy, but he could not risk asking the oracle directly about treason. His genius and his downfall lay in the phrasing. He did not ask if he should commit the act or if it would succeed. Instead, he framed his question in a way that seemed pious and loyal. He asked Zeus whether it would be more pleasing to the gods and more profitable for the kingdom if the current ruler were replaced by a new, more dynamic leadership. He was not asking for a prediction, but for a moral and divine endorsement, carefully hiding his own role in the planned change. The rustle of the sacred oak leaves, interpreted by the priests, came back as a clear affirmation. The gods, it seemed, would look favorably upon this transition of power. This was the green light the conspirators needed. The oracle's positive response was not just an answer, it was a weapon. They used it to recruit more members to their cause, swearing them to secrecy with the ultimate guarantee, the stated approval of Zeus himself. The plot unfolded with terrible speed. The king, perhaps warned too late or betrayed by those he thought were friends, was overthrown in a swift and bloody coup. The conspirator who had visited Dodona stood by the new ruler, believing his cleverness had secured a divine mandate for his actions. But the story does not end with his victory. It became a cautionary tale told in whispers throughout the Greek world, a story about the double-edged nature of prophetic power. The oracle, an institution often supported by kings to legitimize their own rule, had been effortlessly turned against the throne. It revealed a terrifying vulnerability. The gods did not seem to care who asked the question, only that it was asked. A sufficiently clever and ruthless man could, in essence, shop for a divine sanction, manipulating the most powerful spiritual authority to serve his own ambition. This was not a failure of the oracle, but a feature of its open access. It meant that the voice of the gods could be rented by anyone with the wit to frame their request correctly. For every king who used Delphi or Dodona to solidify his power, there was a noble in the shadows crafting a question that would convince his followers that heaven itself was on their side. The system designed to uphold order could so easily become the very engine of its destruction. The most terrifying prophecy did not come from a tripod but from a hole in the ground. In the remote town of Lebedeia, the Oracle of Trophonius offered divine knowledge through a ritual so frightening it was said men's hair turned white from the ordeal. This was not a place for the faint of heart. Seekers had to undergo days of intense preparation, living in a special house, bathing only in a sacred river, and making daily sacrifices to condition their spirit for the horrors to come. The final guide on this journey into the underworld was not a priest but a local boy. This child would lead the trembling seeker to the mouth of a subterranean chasm, a pit that was believed to be the entrance to the hero Trophonius' sacred cave. The boy's role was absolutely vital. He was the last living, breathing connection to the world above as the seeker prepared to be swallowed by the earth. Was this child a mere guide? He was far more than that. In a ritual drenched in death symbolism, the boy represented a fragile thread of innocence and purity, a final beacon of the human world before the seeker faced the raw, chthonic power of the divine. After anointing the seeker with special oils and perhaps reciting prayers, the boy would watch as the adult was instructed to lie on his back and slowly feed his feet into the narrow opening. Then, with a sudden, terrifying pull, the seeker would be dragged downward into the darkness as if the earth itself had grabbed him. He would descend into a cramped, pitch-black chamber, a place of absolute sensory deprivation. Here, the prophecy did not arrive as a spoken verse. It came as a visceral, overwhelming experience. Some seekers reported hearing a cacophony of disembodied voices. Others felt the presence of unseen beings or received their answers in a sudden, blinding flash of insight. Many were simply paralyzed by a pure, unadulterated terror that imprinted the god's message directly onto their psyche. After what felt like an eternity, the seeker would be pushed back out through a different opening, feet first, disoriented and often unable to speak. The priests would then sit him upon the throne of memory, where they would patiently coax out the details of his traumatic vision, interpreting the fragments of his shattered consciousness. The child, waiting nearby, was the symbolic bookend to this transformation. He witnessed the seeker's confident departure and his shattered return. His presence framed the entire ordeal, a reminder of the innocence and sanity that had to be left behind to gain knowledge from the gods of the underworld. This brutal practice reveals a profound truth about ancient spirituality. Not all wisdom came from light and reason. Some of the most potent truths were found only in the deepest, most primal darkness and required the guidance of an innocent to find your way back. The voice of the gods was backed by the unmistakable weight of gold. While pilgrims sought wisdom from the smoke-filled chamber, the true, enduring power of Delphi was measured in the vast treasures that filled its sanctuaries. This was not merely a spiritual center, it was the central bank of the ancient Greek world. Lining the sacred way were magnificent treasury buildings, each one a physical thank you note from a victorious city-state. After the Battle of Marathon, the Athenians built a treasury to house their spoils, a permanent marble declaration that the god had favored them. The Spartans, the Thebans, and countless others did the same, each offering a share of their plunder to secure future divine favor. These structures were not empty symbols, they were overflowing with solid wealth, gold and silver vessels, intricate statues, priceless armor taken from defeated enemies, and vast quantities of coined money. This accumulation of wealth transformed the Oracle into a financial powerhouse. It began to operate as a lender to kings and cities, issuing massive loans from its divine reserves. A polis rebuilding after an earthquake, a tyrant funding a new public works project, even a distant colony needing capital for its expansion, all could petition the priests of Apollo for a loan. The temple's wealth was considered sacrosanct, protected by the fear of divine retribution, which made it the most stable and trusted financial institution in the Mediterranean. But such a concentration of riches could not help but attract a more worldly kind of attention. This sacred trust was shattered during the Third Sacred War, a conflict that revealed the brutal reality behind the spiritual facade. The neighboring state of Phocis, drowning in debt and political strife, made a desperate and shocking decision. Their general, Philomelus, led his army not to defend the sanctuary but to loot it. They seized Delphi itself, arguing a dubious ancestral claim to the land, and their justification was a masterpiece of cynical pragmatism. They used the temple's own vast wealth, the very treasures dedicated to Apollo, to fund their mercenary army and fight the war. For over a decade, the Phocians systematically melted down golden offerings and coined silver statues to pay the soldiers who were defending their right to have stolen it all in the first place. Their opponents were horrified, proclaiming this the ultimate sacrilege, but the Phocians simply replied that the money was now consecrated to the god of war instead of the god of prophecy. The plunder of Delphi laid bare a simple, uncomfortable truth. The voice that claimed to speak for the divine was inseparable from the economy that gave it a megaphone. Its spiritual authority granted it immense wealth, and that very wealth made it a prize that could corrupt the most sacred of trusts. Could any prophecy, no matter how divinely inspired, ever be truly separated from the economic and political power that funded the tripod from which it was spoken? The prophetic voice of a woman was not confined to the polished stone of Delphi. Across the scattered islands and rugged mainland, other women channeled the divine, operating outside the strict, male-managed institution of the Pythia. These were the Sibyls, legendary figures who carried their power within them, independent of any single temple. The most famous was the Erythraean Sibyl, who was said to have lived for nearly 1,000 years. Her prophecies were not given on demand to visiting ambassadors, but were spontaneous, ecstatic utterings she would shriek from the mouth of her cave. She did not wait for clients. The god possessed her when it willed, and she would write her visions on oak leaves, scattering them at the cave's entrance for the wind to carry or for the brave to collect and attempt to reassemble. This was prophecy in its rawest, most untamed form, a stark contrast to the scheduled, priest-mediated sessions at Delphi. While the Pythia was a role, a sacred office held by different women over time, a Sibyl was considered a singular, timeless force of nature. Her authority came not from an institutional title, but from her perceived direct and volatile link to Apollo, a connection so intense it was believed to grant her an impossibly long life. This independence came with a different kind of power and a different kind of vulnerability. She was not protected by a wealthy sanctuary or a board of priests, but was a solitary, often itinerant figure, answerable only to the god who spoke through her. In the city of Patri, a different model of female prophecy flourished, one dedicated not to Apollo but to the earth goddess Demeter. Here, in a sanctuary far from the political spotlight, priestesses delivered prophecies after performing specific secret rites. The process was likely less about frenzied trance and more about a deep, ritualized communion with the goddess of the harvest and the underworld. Their prophecies probably focused on agricultural cycles, the health of the community, and matters of life and death, reflecting Demeter's domains. They served a local agrarian population, their wisdom grounded in the soil rather than in the machinations of empires. This trio of examples, the institutional Pythia, the wild Sibyl, and the chthonic priestess of Demeter, reveals a rich and varied landscape. Female prophetic power was not a monolithic gift. It could be a civic duty, a personal curse, or a sacred office, its expression shaped entirely by the deity it served and the community that needed it. The story of ancient Greek prophecy is so much more than the tale of one famous temple. It is the story of countless women who served as the essential, living bridges between their people and the unpredictable will of the gods. While kings plotted wars and cities sought foundations, the most common questions whispered to the gods were about the quiet turmoil of the human heart. The lead tablets from Dodona offer a stunningly intimate archive, not of statecraft, but of the raw, personal anxieties that define daily life. Here, far from the grand political stage, a farmer would carefully scratch out a question about his wife's ability to bear a child, his stylus pressing his deepest hope and fear into the soft metal. A young woman, her future hanging in the balance, might ask if the man her father had chosen for her was truly the right partner, if their marriage would be blessed or blighted. Others, gripped by the sweet agony of unrequited love, sought divine help in winning the affection of their beloved, their pleas a timeless echo of our own longing for connection. These were not abstract theological inquiries. They were desperate requests for guidance on the most fundamental human experiences: love, fertility, and the fragile architecture of a family. The oracle served as the ultimate confidant, a divine therapist who could not be shocked or judgmental. In a world without modern medicine to explain infertility or dating apps to navigate romance, the gods were the only recourse for a heart in turmoil. The very act of inscribing the question, folding the tablet, and offering it to the sacred oak was a ritual of release, a way to externalize a private pain and place it in the hands of a higher power. This practice reveals a democracy of desperation. The same divine authority that commanded armies also soothed the anxious heart of a potter worried about his marriage. It confirms that the true power of the oracles was not just in shaping history, but in helping ordinary people survive their own. For every prophecy that crowned a king, there were 100 more that simply tried to help two people build a life together or mend a broken heart. A king's greatest fear is often the very future he tries to control. One monarch received a chilling prophecy from the oracle, a warning to beware of a man who was born not born. The phrase echoed in his mind, a riddle wrapped in impossibility. What kind of man could fit such a description? His advisors offered grim possibilities. Perhaps it meant a child born after his father's death, a posthumous son who entered the world from a womb that was, in a sense, a tomb. Or maybe it referred to a baby delivered by the brutal procedure we now call a caesarean section, a child cut from the belly of a mother who did not survive the birth, a life that began with a death. There was even a more terrifying interpretation, a being born of a mortal and an immortal, a demigod who was both of this world and not of it. The king, desperate to secure his throne, decided on a path of absolute prevention. He would eliminate any potential threat. If the prophecy meant a posthumous child, he would ensure no pregnant widow of a rival noble could ever give birth. He ordered the immediate execution of all recently widowed noblewomen who were with child, a horrific act of preemptive violence designed to close off one possible path to his doom. He thought he was carving a safe future out of blood and terror, but fate, as the Greeks understood it, is not a road you can block with a barricade. It is a river that simply finds another course. The king's brutal action did not stop the prophecy, it merely guided its fulfillment. The man born not born turned out to be a child from a different circumstance entirely. In one version of the tale, the foretold avenger was a son whose mother died in childbirth, making him literally not born in the natural way. In another, he was the posthumous son of a man the king had killed years before, but from a family the king had overlooked in his purge. The king's own horrific attempt to circumvent the oracle created the very conditions of hatred and revenge that propelled this fated child toward him. This is the core of the Greek tragic vision. The prophecy was not a simple prediction of an event, it was a statement of an unchangeable cosmic truth. The king's frantic efforts to escape it were not a fight against a future, but part of the mechanism that made that future inevitable. His actions were the footsteps leading him directly to the man he feared most. The oracle did not just tell him what would happen, it revealed the terrifying truth that in trying to run from his fate, he was only running directly into its arms. Respect for the gods did not prevent a thirst for their gold. As the Roman Republic expanded its reach, its generals arrived in Greece with a dual fascination for the oracle's ancient wisdom and their staggering accumulated wealth. A man like the dictator Sulla, a figure of ruthless ambition, still felt the pull of Delphi's authority. Before crucial battles, he sent envoys to consult the Pythia, seeking the same divine endorsement that Greek generals had coveted for centuries. Later Roman emperors, including Augustus, would make a show of sending generous gifts and confirming the temple's privileges, performing a public reverence for this ancient seat of prophecy. This apparent respect, however, masked a far more pragmatic and brutal reality. The very treasures that made the sanctuaries magnificent also made them targets. When Rome's finances were stretched thin by endless military campaigns, the inviolable wealth of the gods became a convenient solution. Sulla himself, during his war against King Mithridates, did not just ask the oracle for advice. He ordered the systematic confiscation of Delphi's most precious offerings, a vast hoard of gold and silver statues, vessels, and crowns, all hauled away to pay his legions. This was not a rogue act of vandalism, it was state-sanctioned plunder. The pattern repeated over decades. Another Roman commander, after a different victory, looted hundreds of priceless statues from Epidaurus and other sacred sites, shipping them back to adorn the public spaces of Rome. This transfer of wealth was a profound symbolic act. Every golden tripod melted down for coinage, every marble god carted off to a Roman forum, was more than just spoils of war. It was a deliberate transfer of divine favor, or pax deorum, from the conquered to the conqueror. The Romans were not merely stealing beautiful objects, they were capturing the spiritual power of Greece itself, bringing it home to legitimize their own burgeoning empire. The message was clear: the gods had favored Rome, and the empty treasuries of Delphi were the proof. This systematic looting did more than just strip the sanctuaries of their physical splendor. It severed the vital link between the oracle's spiritual authority and the economic power that sustained it. With their reserves drained, the temples could no longer act as banks or fund grand civic projects. Their influence waned as their splendor faded, making them vulnerable to the final, official silencing that was to come. The Romans did not just consult the oracles, they consumed them, leaving behind hollowed-out shells where the voice of the gods had once echoed through halls of gold. The most profound prophecies were sometimes turned inward, predicting the very end of the voice that spoke them. A powerful legend surrounds the great Oracle of Didyma, a rival to Delphi on the coast of Asia Minor, which was said to have foretold its own violent destruction. In its final years, the story goes, the priestess delivered a chilling message, not to a king or a general, but to the temple priests themselves. She spoke of a great fire that would consume the sacred laurel tree, of a collapse so total that the very stones would cry out, and of a foreign power whose greed would silence the god forever. The prophecy hung in the air, a grim and unavoidable future that the temple was powerless to prevent. This was a divine expiration date, a celestial acknowledgement that even the homes of the gods are not eternal. Then history delivered on the prophecy's grim promise. In the early 3rd century, the Persian king Darius III, during his campaigns against Alexander the Great, ordered the systematic destruction of rebellious Greek cities in the region. His armies descended upon Didyma, and in a calculated act of terror, they set the magnificent temple complex ablaze. The sacred precinct, one of the largest in the ancient world, was reduced to a smoldering ruin. The great fire, the collapse of marble columns, the silencing of the god by a foreign invader, every detail of the legend seemed to have been fulfilled with terrifying precision. The psychological power of such a meta-prophecy is immense. For the faithful, it transformed a brutal historical catastrophe, an act of human violence and war, into a preordained divine conclusion. The temple was not defeated, it had simply reached its fated end. This narrative softened the traumatic blow of its loss, replacing helplessness with a sense of cosmic inevitability. It allowed the devotees to grieve not a failure of their god, but the completion of a divine script. The story asks a haunting question. Did the god truly announce his own departure, granting his followers a framework for their grief? Or did the human mind, in the aftermath of unimaginable loss, craft a story of foreknowledge to make the rubble and the silence somehow bearable? The debate over the Pythia's power reaches deep into the very rock beneath the temple. Ancient sources are remarkably consistent on one physical detail, that a sweet-smelling vapor, a pneuma, would rise from a fissure in the earth inside the sacred chamber. The priestess would seat herself on a high tripod directly over this chasm, inhaling these divine breaths as she descended into her prophetic trance. For centuries, this was accepted as the mechanical trigger for her connection to Apollo, the tangible link between the earthly and the divine. Modern science, however, demanded proof. Geologists began to investigate, searching for a rational explanation for this ancient phenomenon. Their hypothesis centered on two particular gases: ethylene, which has a sweet odor and can induce a trance-like dissociative state, and methane, which can cause hallucinations and altered consciousness. The initial search seemed to hit a dead end. Early core samples and surveys of the fractured limestone terrain found no evidence of such gases, leading many to dismiss the ancient accounts as pure myth or symbolic fiction. The case was considered closed, a victory for skeptical rationalism over superstitious legend. But the story was not over. Later, more thorough geological assessments proposed a different picture. They argued that seismic activity common in the region could have once opened and then closed such fissures. A major earthquake in antiquity might have permanently sealed the very vapor channel that the ancient writers so vividly described. The science remains fiercely divided, a puzzle with missing pieces. This leaves us with a profound question that bridges chemistry and consciousness. If the gases were real, was the Pythia's ecstasy a chemically induced state, a form of divine intoxication? Or were the vapors merely a psychological trigger, a powerful placebo that unlocked a deep, ritualized expectation within her mind? Perhaps the truth is not a choice between science and spirit, but a fusion of both. The geological potential for the vapors, combined with the intense spiritual atmosphere of the sanctuary, the chanting priests, the desperate hopes of the seekers, and the Pythia's own trained surrender, could have created the perfect conditions for a genuine, transformative experience. We are still trying to decipher whether the god's voice was carried on a molecule, or if it was always waiting in the quiet spaces of the human mind, simply awaiting the right key to be heard. The voice that guided armies also knew how to build a legend from dust and bone. Across the Greek world, a city's security was believed to depend not just on its walls, but on the physical remains of a mythical hero buried beneath them. The Delphic oracle served as the ultimate authority in this sacred hunt, telling cities where to dig for the relics that would become their divine protectors. When the city of Sparta wanted to cement its military supremacy, it consulted the Pythia, asking where to find the bones of the great hero Orsts, son of Agamemnon. The oracle replied with a riddle, directing them to a place where two winds were blown by stern strife, and blow met blow, and woe lay upon woe. After much searching, a Spartan agent finally solved the puzzle in a small town in Tegea. He found a blacksmith shop where two sets of bellows, the winds, were at work, and the smith was forging weapons of iron, the blows and woes of war. Digging there, he unearthed a gigantic coffin containing bones of immense size, which were triumphantly brought back to Sparta. From that moment, Spartan military fortunes were said to have dramatically improved. This was not mere superstition, it was a brilliant fusion of spiritual authority and civic branding. The oracle acted as a divine archaeologist, providing the map to a city's glorious past, and as a masterful public relations manager, sanctioning a local cult that unified the people. The belief was that the hero's spirit, anchored by his physical bones and properly honored with sacrifices and a shrine, would actively defend the city from plague, famine, and invasion. The bones of Oedipus in Athens or Theseus's relics returned to the city that bore his name, served as supernatural fortifications. Why would a city go to such lengths to find a set of ancient bones? Because in a single sacred relic, they gained a tangible link to a mythical golden age, a divine protector, and a story that made their city special. The oracle did not just predict the future, it excavated and certified the past, giving communities the heroes they needed to face whatever was to come. A lone woman walked into the court of Rome's last king, her arms filled with 9 mysterious books. This was the Cumaean Sibyl, and she offered Tarquin the Proud a complete collection of prophecies detailing every future crisis and salvation for his kingdom. Her price, however, was so exorbitant it seemed like madness. The king, a man infamous for his arrogance, laughed at her demand and sent her away. He believed no wisdom, no matter how divine, was worth such a staggering sum. The Sibyl did not argue or plead. She simply walked out, built a fire before the palace gates, and burned 3 of the 9 precious volumes. Then she returned, holding the 6 remaining books, and named the exact same outrageous price. Tarquin was even more incredulous, certain he was dealing with a madwoman, and refused her a second time. Once more, she left and burned another 3 books. When she came back a final time, holding only the 3 surviving volumes, she stated her original price yet again. Something in her unwavering demeanor, in the terrifying finality of her actions, finally pierced the king's pride. A chilling realization dawned on him. This was no bluff. She was systematically destroying divine knowledge, and if he refused this last chance, Rome would be left with nothing. He paid the full, original price for the 3 remaining books. These became the legendary Sibylline books, consulted for centuries by special priests whenever Rome faced plague, invasion, or disaster. The advice within them, from introducing new gods to prescribing elaborate rituals, repeatedly saved the city. But the story is a profound tragedy. For every crisis the 3 books helped solve, there were potentially 6 other disasters they could have prevented entirely, their wisdom lost forever to the flames of a king's pride. The Sibyl's lesson was brutal. True wisdom often arrives with a cost that seems unreasonable, and ignoring the prophet does not make the warning any less true. It only makes the ultimate price that much higher. A philosopher's scorn could cut deeper than any sword. While statesmen and farmers sought answers from the gods, a new kind of thinker emerged in the bustling Greek city-states, one who questioned the very foundations of the divine. The philosopher Xenophon stood at the forefront of this intellectual rebellion, and he directed his sharpest criticism at the heart of the prophetic tradition. He openly mocked the idea that gods looked and acted like humans, pointing out the obvious flaw. If horses or oxen could draw, he famously said, they would draw their gods to look like horses and oxen. This was a direct attack on the poets Homer and Hesiod, whose vivid tales of squabbling, jealous deities had shaped the Greek imagination for centuries. For Xenophon, the entire concept of divination was equally absurd. He ridiculed the notion that a god would communicate through the chaotic rustle of leaves or the frenzied mutterings of a priestess, arguing that a true, perfect divine being would have no need for such crude and unreliable methods. This philosophical skepticism struck at the core of the oracle's authority. It dared to suggest that prophecy was not a divine gift, but a human invention, a tool for control or a reflection of our own fears and desires. The oracles, however, were not passive in this debate. They existed within a dynamic cultural landscape, and their enduring power was a testament to their ability to answer these challenges not with dogma, but with a profound understanding of the human condition. The philosophers offered pure reason, a cold and brilliant light. The oracles offered something else entirely, a wisdom that acknowledged the messy, emotional, and uncertain reality of life. They provided a space for the terror and hope that reason alone could not soothe. The very existence of this philosophical critique proves that the voice from the tripod was never monolithic truth. It was a participant in a grand, ongoing conversation about the nature of the gods, the limits of human knowledge, and the search for meaning in a chaotic world. The oracles survived for as long as they did not because everyone believed without question, but because they offered answers that resonated on a level deeper than philosophical argument. They spoke to the heart. The temples are silent, but their voices have never truly left us. We hear them every day in our own language. When we call a tech giant an oracle for its market predictions, or describe a wise mentor's advice as Sibylline, we are speaking the linguistic legacy of Dodona and Delphi. These words are not just labels, they carry the full weight of ancient expectation. the idea of a truth that is profound, difficult, and potentially world-altering. This archetype of the cryptic seer has become one of our most enduring storytelling tools. In the wizard Gandalf's careful parsing of ancient prophecies, or in the terrifying precision of the centaur Thyrion's warnings at Hogwarts, we see the same pattern that once decided the fates of kings. The riddles of the Pythia echo in the puzzle Harry Potter must solve to find the Philosopher's Stone, where the answer lies not in brute force but in understanding the hidden nature of the obstacles before him. Just as the Spartans had to decode the true meaning of a promised victory, modern heroes must learn that a prophecy is not a simple instruction manual, but a test of character and intellect. The oracle's greatest power was never about foretelling an unchangeable future. It was about forcing a choice, demanding wisdom from the listener. Our modern myths have absorbed this lesson completely. The oracle lives on because we still grapple with the same fundamental human dilemmas. We still seek guidance in uncertain times, and we still understand that the most important truths are rarely simple. They come to us wrapped in mystery, challenging us to find the courage and clarity within ourselves to understand them. From the political calculations behind a sacred war to the desperate love spells scratched on lead, these 30 stories reveal a world where the divine and the human were inseparably intertwined. The oracles were not mystical vending machines dispensing simple fortunes. They were nerve centers of ancient society, acting as kingmakers who crowned rulers and toppled tyrants, economic powerhouses that funded cities and were plundered by empires, and deeply personal counselors who soothed the private heartaches of farmers and lovers. They were the beating heart of Greek spirituality, a complex system where faith met finance and politics danced with prophecy. This journey through their untold histories shows us that the true power of the oracle was never in predicting an unchangeable destiny, but in holding up a mirror to the people who sought them out. It reflected their deepest ambitions, their most profound fears, and their endless capacity for both wisdom and self-deception. Our modern world, for all its technology, still echoes with that same fundamental human urge. We still look for signs, seek guidance in uncertain times, and hope for a glimpse of what is to come. We are still asking the same questions, only now we direct them at algorithms, financial forecasts, and scientific models, searching for our own kind of oracle. So, after this incredible journey, we have to ask you, which of these stories reshaped your understanding of the ancient world the most? Was it the warrior priestess, the child guiding seekers into darkness, or the king who paid with his empire for hearing only what he wanted to hear? Share your favorite untold story and your own thoughts on the enduring mystery of prophecy in the comments below. And if you want to continue exploring the hidden corners of history, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the past.